I see many of you attendees already there. I'm going to give it maybe 30 to 60 seconds more to let any latecomers in, and then we'll get started. Okay, so as a reward to all you on-time attendees, we will get started with this. So welcome to our virtual conversation about developmentally appropriate practice and why its use impacts the outcome for children in early childhood, the period that we know is from birth to third grade, not just to preschool. My name is Julie Kallenbach, and I'm the former Director of Early Learner Initiatives in Elgin School District U46. I'm happy to say that U46 did recognize that kindergarten is a part of early childhood. Hence the title was Director of Early Learner Initiatives. I'm also trainer and coach for kids, the Kindergarten Individual Development Survey. It has been so exciting to watch kindergartens begin to transform their practices as the state of Illinois moved to a more developmentally appropriate assessment for kindergarten students. We are now putting balanced importance on social, emotional, and approaches to learning, along with the literacy and the mathematics. And to do that, classrooms have had to plan for more child-initiated learning and opportunities for children to play together. So let's start our inquiry into why developmentally appropriate practice positively impacts student outcomes. So some logistics about participating in this webinar. First, there will be a downloadable PDF of this webinar at the end, and it includes all the references and resources and links that we will talk about. So don't worry about capturing points of interest that I'm going over or resources you may want, because you'll be able to download that. And you will be able to see a place to type in questions. You can type these in at any time, and we will stop along the way several times to answer questions that have come in. And to be as interactive as possible, you can also type in comments. You can say, yes, I agree with such and such an idea, or wow, that was an aha moment about blank, or I need to know more about blank. So feel free to put any comments in also. So, this learning session is brought to you by the Birth to 3 Continuity Project. Illinois believes that a high-quality, intentionally aligned education system from birth to third grade is essential for the success of our state's children, especially the highest need students. Birth to 3 Continuity Project is committed to ensuring a high-quality, comprehensive system of teaching, learning, and support for children from birth through third grade. We know this is necessary to prevent possible fade-out of the gains children made when they participated in state programs such as Prevention Initiative or Preschool for All or the expansion grants. In order to effectively serve children in Illinois, the state is aligning and transforming state and local systems to assure collective impact across service sectors. So the intended outcomes for this webinar is that we will overview developmentally appropriate practices, link developmentally appropriate practice and the requirements of the Preschool for All and expansion grant rubrics, share some research along the way on developmentally appropriate practice and student outcomes, and then provide resources for embedding developmentally appropriate practice in birth to third grade. So these resources will include a lot of ideas about how to get started or to strengthen the use of developmentally appropriate practice throughout their learning years. So I'd like to do a poll real quick here about who is in the room. I was really excited to see the registration list and the variety of participants on this. We have people from home child care and community collabs and advocacy groups, along with teachers and administrators. So if you could, you will see the quick poll. What type of position do you hold? And I'm sorry, community people, it didn't give me any other, we could only put 5. So I know you might end up having to be an other. So please click on one of the following to see how you see your role. So we're at about almost at 90% of the people who voted. I'll give it a couple more seconds. So I do see that it's definitely, hold on here. It's definitely a nice mixed group. We have 30% of the people as preschool administrators, so hopefully you will see the connections to the grants that you're getting ready to write and finalize. 10% of you are preschool teachers, 5% are K-3 administrators, 15% are K-3 teachers, and 40% are other. So sorry, other, I would be lovely to have more specifics on you, but we'll try that next time. So the next slide is another quick poll. What is your current level of knowledge with developmentally appropriate practices? So if you could go ahead and click where you see yourself in your knowledge of DAP. So we're at about 90% of people who voted, and hold on here. It looks like only 7% of you have no knowledge about this. 22% see themselves as beginners. 46% are showing some implementation, and 24% feel like we're at advanced implementation. So that's great. All right. So first we're going to do an overview of developmentally appropriate practices. Why does it keep flipping to, there we go. Developmentally appropriate practice is definitely a term you could take an entire series of college courses on, but this is our best attempt to share the basic foundations. The very simplest definition of developmentally appropriate practice is a way of teaching that focuses on how we know children in early childhood learn best in doing those practices. So we will go over the 2 foundational principles, 3 core considerations that elaborate on those principles, 5 guidelines for effective teaching, and 10 effective developmentally appropriate teaching strategies. So we start with the 2 foundational principles, and these are the mantra that teachers need to use in planning and instruction. Meeting children where they are starts with knowing about child development and learning. This learning often occurs with early childhood degrees, but is often not as in-depth with elementary teacher degrees. So this sometimes is a new concept to people that have had elementary degrees. In the second point of knowing child development is also knowing what the children bring to the classroom. What are their cultures, their language, their family information? What are the topics and activities that interest them? We need to know this if we're going to meet them where they are. The second point is looking at children reaching challenging and achievable goals. Those are the 2 key points. When you know child development and the child, you can tune in to their abilities by planning instruction for them at their level. This does not mean we're not going to have rigorous goals. Rigorous goals mean opportunities to support and supports to achieve within their zone of proximal development. The 3 core considerations that support and reinforce the key principles is that knowing about child development, what's typical at each age and stage of early development is crucial. This knowledge is based on research and helps teachers decide which experience are best for their students' learning and development. I see this very often when doing some work with kindergarten teachers. We need to go over what is developmentally appropriate for a 5- and 6-year-old. When we work with first grade teachers, what is it about those children in the early primary years? Where is their development at? But with number 2, we see that we have to also learn about specific children, and that helps us teach and nurture each child as an individual. By continually observing their play and their interaction with the physical environment and other children, we learn about their own interests and abilities and developmental progress in order to plan for activities that are rigorous but within their ZPD. And then number 3, we really need to continue to learn about their families. What are their families' values and their hopes and their expectations? Because if we match our teaching with what's culturally important to the children in our classroom, we will make much more progress. So let's talk about the zone of proximal development. We talk a lot about that in early childhood, and it is a Vygotskian concept that reflects the 2 guiding principles and those core considerations. How do we meet children where they are and plan for challenging and achievable goals? That lower green level represents skills that a child has mastered and can do independently. That purplish at the top shows skills that the child cannot do even with adult support. So the zone of proximal development is that stage where the child begins to stretch toward a higher skill with adult help or scaffolding. And it is only through authentic assessment, where you observe and collect evidence while children are engaged in typical activities, that teachers can know what they can do independently and what supports do they need to reach a challenging goal. So the first link we're going to make to the Preschool for All and expansion grants is that it's required that at least 10%, but not more than 30%, of each classroom's enrolled children have disabilities. Those children with IEPs are active members of the classroom, where strategies, supports, and services are provided inside the classroom and embedded in the natural activities of play and routines. So again, it's meeting children where they are and helping them reach challenging and achievable goals using their ZPD. It's very critical knowing you're going to have children with disabilities in the classroom too, which is a requirement, and it's also the law for the kindergarten upgrades too, that children are in the least restrictive environment. So the first resource I'm sharing with you are these developmentally appropriate practice books. There's a specific one for preschool, kindergarten, and one for first, second, and third grade. Most of the resources I'm talking about today are from NAEYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children. This is the premier professional organization for research and instruction and professional development. And so it's also often the cheapest place to get the books. So just you'll see that I have NAEYC listed quite often. You can go to naeyc.org to order these books. They're invaluable resources. They really give in-depth coverage to typical child development in all of these grades, along with the developmentally appropriate practice for teaching, curriculum planning, assessment, and developing those reciprocal relationships with families. If you're a member of NAEYC, you do receive a 20% discount on the books. I am not profiting from this with NAEYC, but I just want to give you some ways to be successful. Being a member with them also gives you access to their 2 journals and online resources. I looked up membership today, and it ranges from an entry level of $30 a year to premium level, which is $150 a year, but that includes 5 NAEYC published books a year. So I'd like to take a stop at this point and address any questions or comments you've typed in. So let me see how we're doing on those.
No questions so far, Julie.
Okay. So make sure you type in any questions. I'll try not to talk too fast so that you can have some time to make sure we address what your needs are. So we will move on to a review of the developmentally appropriate practice. There are 5 guidelines for effective teaching. I have actually seen several school districts using this framework of these 5 guidelines as their framework for laying out their expectations and procedures for their different curriculums. I've seen it in preschool and now in kindergarten, where these are like the headers for the different chapters of how their program works. So I'm going to take each of these 5 guidelines and give you an example of what is a developmentally appropriate practice and what is it not. And these are taken from the 3 books I just showed you. There are lots of examples to choose from. It was interesting as I picked the examples because people often assume these are practices relevant only for preschool, But all of the examples I'm giving today, I pulled out of the kindergarten and first, second, and third books. So it's interesting because preschool people often know these practices, but don't. And if you're a K-3 administrator, you might not have thought about them for your K-1 and 2 classrooms. So it starts with creating a caring community of learners. And we know that is intricately connected to social emotional learning, and that providing choice time for peer interactions and working together and learning to be a part of a group is creating that sense of belonging. So what is developmentally appropriate is that there are a variety of opportunities for children to work and play in partners, in small groups, and even within whole group instruction, there's time to interact with each other. The contrasting part of that is that classrooms are run with mostly whole group settings and children remain in their place, so there's not a lot of interaction even during whole group, and that the classroom organization limits peer interactions. You often see this when children are assigned to tables and usually have to work on their own paper and pencil tasks, so they don't have, it limits their ability to interact with each other. This example really resonated with me because I've seen teachers struggle with what is their role when there's a lot more small group or individualized learning as they move away from so much large group instruction. It's different because when they're in large group or they're at tables, you have a good sense of control. So it's a big shift for teachers to letting go of that control and having the children interact more with each other. So the research I wanted to talk to you about as far as this is that students that are in classrooms that incorporate developmentally appropriate practices display fewer stress behaviors, such as the nail biting, the fidgeting, that we think all the kids are ADHD, and that the aggressive behaviors that children often have in inappropriate environments. Also, children in inappropriate classrooms show more stress behaviors during large group times and when there's a lot of worksheet activities. So we know that creating a less stressful environment where children have extended time for choice activities and attention to social emotional learning will contribute to much more effective learning for them. It's when classrooms spend longer times in large group instruction or at worksheet activities that we can expect to see more acting out behaviors. I wanted to share a quick video clip of how using developmentally appropriate practice for this kindergarten teacher who was prompted by the use of the kids assessment and how this shift addressed more of the social emotional domain along with the academics.
Hi, my name is Gina Jordan, and for the past 12 years I've been a kindergarten teacher in the Valley View School District in Bolingbrook, Illinois. 3 years ago, our district made the change and adopted the kids reporting tool as our kindergarten report card, and this was a big change for us. It really required me to be more intentional in my teaching and to make time to schedule observations of students, especially with their social and emotional needs. With the encouragement of my district, I've incorporated play-based learning stations into my classroom, and it's made a huge change. While my students are still responsible for learning all those Common Core standards, we also have time through those play-based stations to have more interaction and talking in my classroom. Especially with my English language learners, this has been a big help with their vocabulary gains and with their overall confidence. In addition, they find all these sneaky ways to hide math and literacy in these play-based stations. They're writing shopping lists, and they are including math thinking in their blocks and centers. And it's just really amazing at all the ways that they are learning, but they don't think that they're learning, they think that they're playing. Finally, for myself, I found that I am moving more away from those pencil and paper activities and using more discussions and conversations in my classroom. And because of this, students feel like they are heard and that their opinion is valued. And I find that our classroom climate overall is a lot more positive. I'm not going to say that my classroom is perfect, but I will say that it's more developmentally appropriate. And as a teacher, I feel that this is right and this is what it should be. I also feel like, as opposed to years past, I know more about my children, especially their social and emotional needs, and this helps me be a better teacher.
So Gina is just a good example of the shift that we are starting to see in kindergarten. Much more attention on social emotional, now that we have to assess that with the kids instrument. More child-initiated activities, so that we can see how do they approach learning, what's their engagement and persistence. We see more academics that are now embedded in play, like she talked about the shopping list and math activities and blocks. So teachers know their students more in depth now, and that really does build the relationship, which we know that a strong relationship with your teacher is a critical piece for success for children. How I see this linked to the Preschool for All expansion grants is that the universal and targeted supports for their positive behavior and social emotional have to be included. Part of the rubric now talks about following some kind of social emotional model or curriculum, and this is something that we see a little bit of fallout as children get older. In some districts, I'm seeing a lot more now with social emotional curriculums in those K1, 2, 3 classes. When we do this and create those appropriate environments, this does decrease the stress for children, and building those social emotional skills will help us try to eliminate any of those suspensions and expulsions for early learners. So the second guideline is teaching to enhance development and learning. What is developmentally appropriate is when teachers encourage exploration and initiation and peer interaction with extended time and learning centers. Extended time and learning centers can be explained with, in the Preschool for All grant, you have to have at least 50 to 60 minutes of child-initiated play. Best practice listed in that Focus on Kindergarten DAP book talks about 30 minutes in a half-day program and 60 minutes a day in a full-day program with child-initiated, inquiry-based explorative learning. What it is not is that there's too much emphasis on rituals and frequent transitions to stick to the schedule that really interrupt their learning how to sustain their engagement. I use calendar as an example because sometimes we've decided that calendar is a time of day that we cannot let go of, and that we do the same thing every day, and it's not meeting children where they are and moving them forward. There's 10 effective developmentally appropriate practice teaching strategies listed for NACCE, and you can see that it's about acknowledging what the children say or do. So first of all, that means you're present. When they're playing, when they're at learning centers, you are there and know what they're doing. It is all about encouraging their persistence and effort. We talk about giving specific feedback rather than general comments. General comments like, I like the way you're playing. Modeling ways to approach problems. Demonstrating and modeling how they can expand on their learning activity. There's that ZPD thinking again, creating or adding challenges, asking those questions to provoke their deeper thinking, pushing them to work on the edge of their competence, helping them feel successful but stretching. Providing a lot more expansion information for them, new words, new labels, facts, ideas, and then giving directions and redirections for children's actions or behavior. You can download an infographic on these 10 effective DAP teaching strategies from NACCE, and what I like about it is that you could post that in a classroom, and it's a really good tool for support staff or visitors or parents to come to your classroom to see why you're doing some of the things you're doing. Teachers could also choose to focus on one of these strategies a week to help build different skills that they have when they're circulating learning centers or when children are playing individually. So the research and the results of teaching in a developmentally appropriate classroom is that children describe their cognitive competence more positively when they have been in a child-initiated rather than an academically oriented program. We often call this growth mindset or ability to take a risk. And when children have had experience initiating some activities and following through on their interests, they feel more cognitively competent. I chose a second example in the teaching guideline, and what it talks about is that balance between child-initiated learning and play and the adult-guided learning experiences that could also be playful learning. The contrasting examples is where the children are engaged in child-guided activities, but the teacher is not contributing to what the children are doing and expanding in their ZPD. And that's a growing point for many teachers. they don't quite know what to do when the children are in child-initiated activities. So it's an area of growth I've seen in coaching. But teachers, as they learn this skill, they become much more intentional in making decisions. Are they going to take the time to just observe children's current capabilities and see where they are? What are they capable of doing with or without support? Sometimes they're just taking the time to wait and follow a child's lead. We know if they do that, the children are going to take them amazing places with where they're learning and what they're interested in. They may be intentional about deciding during child-guided activities that they're going to collect evidence, or maybe they're going to join the child and support them with expanding. I love this saying, and I've used it a lot in training, it's teaching the teachers to shift from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. I love this book. This is a really good resource that talks about how to be involved with children during centers and during choice play, and it's a skill that many teachers need to build. This is a really helpful book that gives a simple format for those powerful interactions as well. And there is a follow-up book to this for administrators called Powerful Interactions in Coaching. And I got the online version, and so they give video examples of that. So briefly, the key steps in Powerful Interactions on that resource is that the 3 steps are being present, just being in the moment with the child, listening and observing, and then when you're seeing that what's happening, then you can connect to their idea and their interest in whatever they were doing. And the next step then for that interaction is extending, adding one more thing. If you're adding a prop to a center, maybe you're adding a role, role ideas when they're playing, or some advanced scenarios in their play, giving them some new language, giving them some role speech, adding some writing, a simple thing like just labeling their structures will take that play to a much deeper level, and then using open-ended questions to get at their thinking. So the research here, the connection I saw was that students in classrooms that incorporate developmentally appropriate practices have much stronger verbal skills. And we know how important this is for interacting with other people, but also for learning to read and for learning, really deepening their comprehension skills. So the newest resource I found lately from NACI that I got with my membership was this Big Questions for Young Mind, Extending Children's Thinking. It's all about those deeper thinking, higher level questions. And it's divided into, here are some types of questions you could ask during math, during literacy, during science. It also talks about in the beginning of the school year, how would you question children? How can that move to deeper and deeper questions? The third guideline in planning curriculum is to achieve important goals, and by that we mean the standards. I chose this example because it talks about an integrated curriculum. We know that if teachers integrate their ideas across domains throughout the day using themes and projects and play, children make those connections between disciplines. If teachers really should be using the cultural and linguistic richness of their own students in their classroom and explore their own lives and their communities and other parts, possibly other parts of the country or the world that they have experienced through travel or immigration or their background culture or through technology. In contrast to that, teachers convey facts that are kind of remote from what the children have experienced, or too little facts that are not meaningful and interesting to them. An example I have used as a contrast to topics connected to children, much to the dismay of teachers, I must say, is the example of the study of penguins. This is a very remote from most children's background experiences. And how do you integrate penguins into play scenarios? They're cute, might pique some interest, but did this idea really come from their interest or their culture or their home life? I have seen some teachers successfully create penguins into an integrated unit of study if the children were interested. They expanded into being, the children were Arctic dwellers, they were explorers, they talked about climate and habitats and oil spills. But sometimes teachers, and I was as guilty as this as everybody else, is that we have our favorite units and we do penguins in January. when it's really about integrating ideas across the curriculum from what the students' interests are. So research connected to the developmentally appropriate practice of an integrated curriculum is that when we follow this practice, we see children score higher on tests of basic skills, including the receptive and expressive language, written skills, regular daily living skills, interpersonal relationship, and social skills. The link to the PFA and expansion grants is that preschools must use a research-based curriculum that's approved and that is developmentally appropriate and addresses all of the domains of development, not just literacy and math. This resource is a collection of articles that goes much more in depth into play, and here are several of the article titles to pique your interest. We've spent a lot of time in consulting on how do you assess and scaffold make-believe play. I loved this article too, kindergarten through third grade, holding on to play. What does that look like in a classroom? Can play be where you set up a greeting card store and the children have drawn the cards, have written poems, have priced them, and if they have the ability to play, they can still embed the academics. And the last article I pulled out was that Play for All Children, Access to Quality Play Experiences as a Social Justice Issue. Many children have not had the opportunity to play. They have not lived in safe enough neighborhoods. They have not had experiences in rural areas. They may be on technology all the time and have not had the opportunity. So when they get to school, they need to have the opportunity for play to build up the skills that are important in learning. Well, the fourth guideline is assessment. In preschool and now in kindergarten, it's a requirement to use the developmentally appropriate method of observational assessment, where we collect photos and work samples and notes about children, in contrast to using methods that are appropriate for older children. These methods are pull-out testing on the spot, often done by people that aren't the child's teacher. It's done on a computer, or the children are pulled from their usual activities. Those are methods that were designed for older children and pushed down because if it must be good in 8th grade, should probably work in kindergarten, and it's not. But the really next critical need is for teachers also to use this assessment to refine how they plan and implement their learning activities. They're not supposed to just be methods, assessment results that go into a folder and get filed away. They should be a formative assessment, dynamic and useful to guiding their teacher's instruction. So the link to the Preschool for All grant 2 here is that we know that these are the requirements on the rubric for meeting the goals of Preschool for All, and that results of screening had to be made available to teachers so that they can start their initial planning. They will use this assessment information to adjust the curriculum. And in preschool, which is often moving into the older grades now too, how are you going to use their assessment profile to make an individualized education program, not just for children who are in special education, but for all children? What's their personalized learning plan? And developing that for their language, literacy, math should be implemented on their individual's assessments. I'm starting to link some of this to kids now too. We know that kids is an authentic observational assessment that's valid and reliable. We saw that the best practice is to use ongoing assessment for children. So right now, kids is only required in the fall, only 14 measures, but it is available as an ongoing assessment tool 2 other times during the years. It's available 3 times during the year. And districts can also choose to do more domains, more measures within a domain. With the kids too, you can download all this information into child and group reports to individualize learning for children and for different types of classrooms and for schools. The last developmentally appropriate principle is individualizing how you involve families meaningfully. It is not one way through newsletters and homework. Families should be encouraged to participate in whatever way is beneficial to them. It's looking at meeting them where they are and giving them challenging and achievable goals and how they're going to work with their child. If we give excessive demands on families' time and lots of paperwork or only expect that our newsletter will be read and they should do everything in it, is not doing a two-way reciprocal relationship with families. The links to the Preschool for All and expansion, families are needed to be full partners. They talk in there the same thing. There should be communication between home and program that's regular and two-way and appropriate, and especially in their family's native language, and ensuring that families play an integral role in their students' learning. I see this link to kids with the reciprocal relationship with families because part of the kids instrument, families can contribute evidence to their portfolio. And that is a growth area for many teachers, is encouraging families to tell what their child's learning is like at home to really facilitate that two-way communication. And those reports can be created to detail next steps for families. There are at least six or eight districts using kids as their kindergarten report card now, which then tells parents where the child is at, what the skill looks like, and what the next skill is coming. All right, I want to pause for some more questions and comments. It's hard on a webinar to, oh, there are some nice questions. Are you going to
Julie,
do them,
we've
Ashley?
gotten a couple positive responses. Yep.
That's what I like to do.
We've gotten a few positive. So one comment is if you have general positive responses, feel free to put them in the general chat option because other people might want to chat with you. So I just so rather than just questions to me, but if you've got questions in general, a couple of things that came, one person early on was asking if the presentation was going to address, and I said I didn't think so, but you might have some resources, but if it would address developmentally appropriate practices for early childhood, specifically 0 to 36 weeks, so the very young.
So there are definitely resources. There's the general developmentally appropriate practice book that you can order that's not focused on particularly preschool, kindergarten, or the first, second, third. There is a more general DAP book. I would definitely recommend the Powerful Interactions book. They have great examples for the birth to 3 population, and that I think is a great starting point because it's about that being present and connecting with children and just adding just that one more thing to help them along. So that's a book I would recommend for birth to 3.
Okay, and another question was, can you, somebody is new to the area, could you briefly explain what KIDS is? And I can also put a link to the KIDS website in the chat box as well, but if you want to just real briefly say what that is.
Sure. So KIDS is an observational assessment given in kindergarten where the teacher collects evidence, could be photos and note lists, different ways, work samples, and then they take this work that they've collected and they rate the children on a continuum toward end of the year standards for kindergarten. So it helps to see where they come in, what is the next step for their learning, and are they meeting the end of the year standards. So it's the instrument actually has 55 different measures. The state is requiring 14 of those measures be done in the fall so that we can look at child readiness for kindergarten when they overall in the state to help decide where to put the resources, what kind of professional development we need. But that's the must do, that they have to do the 14 measures, and then there's the can do. You can take any additional measures and use them. You can also take and do them more than just the fall. You can do it in mid-year and end of the year. And so the instrument is available. You can go to isbe.net/kids, and the instrument is downloadable, and you can get it from whenever you want it. There's also kids coaches that are available to each school district that can come in and help them do a deeper dive on different domains of learning, can talk about more effective ways of collecting evidence, but really we're moving toward now, how are we going to use this evidence to inform instruction? So isbe.net/kids, and then Ashley will put a link on there for us.
Yep, I just put the link in the chat box so that hopefully people can see that. 2 other quick things. One person was asking for just a little bit more details about, can you explain more the inappropriateness of calendar time. You made that example.
Sure. When calendar, if you look at the way many teachers do calendar now, it's the same as they were doing it, or that we were all doing it in the 80s. And calendar that was a different type of math curriculum. There's a really good article if you go to the early childhood, ISBE.net, and then go to the early childhood about calendars. Most children in kindergarten and in preschool don't have a good return sweep yet. So we talk about doing a linear calendar where they just go, like a number line, because most kids don't understand that return sweep until later in the kindergarten. So that's one example. So many times it could be really appropriate if the teacher knows the children have learned a particular skill and they're moving to the next skill. Sometimes I see that when they're bundling the tens and they're counting by tens and the children get it, but you keep continuing to use that skill over and over. So there's Sally Benke is the author of the article on Might Be Time to Give Up Calendar Time. It just depends on how the teacher does it. Sometimes it's a 20-minute drawn-out affair that's most kids are bored at. Other teachers can make it, a really innovative time. So reading that article would be a really good resource.
All right, last question is, and you might cover this in the next area actually, but how are districts rolling up developmentally appropriate practices to first through third?
Yes, I can talk about that here because I think I've seen it in at least 3 districts now where they have done possibly a short 1-hour introduction to kids for first grade teachers so that they can see what kind of assessments are being done in kindergarten. And we all know that whatever you assess is what you teach. So when we now have to assess engagement and persistence and approaches to learning and reciprocal conversation between children, you have to build in opportunities to do that. So that's one thing I've seen people do. The other I've seen is taking the developmentally appropriate practice first, second, third book and doing some walkthroughs with it. There's some nice chapters on child development, like I said, using those, this is developmentally appropriate, this is not developmentally appropriate, as kind of a self-study. Where do you see yourself on that? So I've also seen districts now trying to make a transition communication plan. How are we going to give the information about where kindergartners are coming into first grade so that the teachers can start from where they are and not waste any time going over some things they may already know. And that's typical for kindergarten teachers too. You need to be able to know where your students are so you don't waste any time. There's some information I'm going to go over about preschool fade-out effect and how to avoid that. And one of them is know where your children are. If the 80% of your students can already count to 30 when they're coming into kindergarten with one-to-one correspondence, you're not going to go back and talk about 1 through 20. So it's knowing where they are and taking each child to that next level.
Okay, you're good.
Okay. All right, so I want to finish up our time together with just some information on why do we have this birth to third focus, which kind of relates to that last question. We know that longitudinal research that continues to follow children who participated in preschool, that they made significant gains in preschool, and that there are long-term outcomes such as higher graduation rates, less special education needs, less likely to be imprisoned, more likely to go to college. All of those are consistent and maintained, but there is some research that's shown by third grade there's some fade-out effect on academic achievement. So the three people you see on the screen here, the Center for the Study of Education Policy from Illinois State University, ISBE, and also the Governor's Office of Early Childhood have joined forces to work on preventing this fade-out effect. This was from a recent article this year that talked about preschool fade-out effect is not inevitable, and these were some of the recommendations to maintain those high-quality gains. making sure you have alignment of standards and assessments within a grade and then across grades, making sure you use formative assessments linked to the standards. They recommend a database that follows children from pre-K to elementary to work on where are they at. Continuing that balanced emphasis on social emotional development and academic skills. So often we see that we have a lot of family involvement in preschool, a lot of emphasis on social emotional, and some of that fades out. And those are two key things that help children continue to maintain their gains. Studying a continuity in your curriculum and presenting some opportunities for teacher collaboration from the pre-K to third, and then coordinating some professional development there. So you can see that the Birth to 3 Continuity Project focuses on these practices of aligned assessments, data-driven instruction, aligning that curriculum and instruction, transitions, joint professional development, and really a key part of the Birth to 3 Continuity is those community partnerships. We know that we can't do it alone as school districts, and that link we have with home care providers and with child care centers is a critical piece of including all children in growth. And the family engagement piece, how are we really working on growing parent leaders and increasing their involvement in schools to be more involved with their children's education. This is definitely now linked to the Preschool for All rubrics. Districts have to be able to show that they have an alignment with one of those, at least one of those areas of potential alignment. So are they going to be addressing community partnerships or wraparound services, parent leadership, data driven, all of the pieces that we know are important for Birth to 3 and avoiding that preschool, that fade out effect. So the last piece of research I wanted to show you was this one, that classrooms characterized by child initiation appear to facilitate creative development. This research team found that kids in child-initiated classrooms were higher on measures of creativity or divergent thinking than children in academically oriented classrooms. Why is this important? Is that this came out in 2016, the Future of Jobs report by the World Economic Forum, and it finds that industries list these types of skill sets that they look for in their current and future employees. And so you see, in 2020, they're predicting complex problem solving is the #1 skill they're going to look for, along with critical thinking and creativity. And you can see in 2015, when they were looking for creativity, it was number 10, and now it's already moved up to number 3. So all of these skills that you see that are needed in 2020 are all things that can be practiced through play, through inquiry-based learning, through project approaches, and for time to practice communication and conversations and social and emotional skills, because these are the skills that are going to be needed in the jobs in the future. So I wanted to say one thing about, you'll notice a lot of the research, and I put all the resources at the end. You see a lot that's old. And I finally, as I was looking for more and more research, the reason it's old is because there was a great big surge of research on developmentally appropriate practices in the 90s when the book The Hurried Child came out. And then a lot of the research faded once No Child Left Behind came, and the focus kind of shifted to much more literacy and math. And so now we're seeing an upswing in this research. So I just want to make sure you point out that I know that a lot of this research is old, but it's starting to come now by these people, these economic people. We're now not seeing research just within the education field. It's starting to come from the economic field also. So what is your next step? We know that we've reached the end of this introductory webinar, but we know that if learning and listening but not applying it is just wasting your time. So what will be your next challenging and achievable goal? Will it be that you want to collect some resources to do more study of DAP? Maybe you want to work more on expanding cultural awareness within the classroom and including it in the curriculum. What does it look like in your place of work for a birth to third grade professional community? How are you using data to make individualized, personalized learning for students? What maybe your goal is building some stronger transition communication from preschool to kindergarten or kindergarten to first grade. Any of these can be learning goal for you. And this is also linked to the Preschool for All because staff members have to have annual written plans addressing their own professional needs and interests. This could be a step that you take beyond the preschool. Maybe staff members could start to think about what are their professional needs and writing up what are their challenging and achievable goals for themselves as far as their professional development. We will be having some further trainings sponsored by the B-3 Continuity Project. Some will be webinars, some in-person seminars to go deeper into some of these topics we've talked about today, such as how do we support our dual language learners, what does it look like when you implement play-based instruction in kindergarten first and second, how do you do more vertical articulation and alignment in that pre-K to third, and what to look for if you're walking into a developmentally appropriate classroom, and how does that crosswalk with the Danielson framework components. So it's our final time for questions. I want to remind you that you can download a PDF of this presentation. You'll just look on the bottom. It'll say handouts. There's a PDF of this whole presentation, and it will be archived, so you could use it for, that could be a goal for you. Use it for small groups or large groups for their professional development. I'll show you that there'll be on the PDF. There's links and the references used within this PowerPoint. So, Ashley, are there any more questions or comments?
No, none have come in. And I did there's a link in the chat box as well to the B3 continuity page, which will have the slides and a recording of this webinar posted, so everybody should have that link as well.
So I want to thank you very much for sharing your valuable time in an afternoon. I know there's always demands on your time, so I thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to email Ashley, or she can send you my email. I'll be happy to answer any more questions. But I wish you all the best during the holiday season, and encourage you to look for some more of the webinars that will be coming up.